Hey everybody, I'm Greg Soul and welcome to another CIQ demo. Today I'm going to be showing you how to use Ansible and our product Ascender, or honestly you could do this with any AWX derivative, to control Tripwire. So first, what is Tripwire? And I tend to make these things too long, so let me see if I can go fast. Tripwire is essentially a file integrity monitoring system for your servers. By default, the open source is only going to do Linux. If you use their enterprise product, you get access to doing this on Windows, and I think other systems like IBM, AIX, I think, something like that. But essentially what it does is it looks at your operating system, any files that you designated as important or critical, as well as any folders, and it essentially makes a baseline of that infrastructure, saves it in a little database, right? Everything's kind of encrypted and stored safely. Well, you can run scans at regular intervals, and if you see something change, you can actually alert on it, right? Like, oh, suddenly some critical part of my infrastructure, the configuration changed, right? So it's not always malicious, right? It could be somebody went outside of a change window and made an update, or various things like that. Or maybe it wasn't a change window, there was an update and you need to update the database. By default, it's got a couple of alerting methods. One is either going to be via email or syslog. And it's interesting and useful if you have like a small handful of servers, but if you have 1,000 servers and you do updates, you don't want 1,000 servers sending you emails all individually. Like, that gets a little bit hairy. So instead of doing it that way, what I have is I have automations that will install it, that will do database updates, and will also run the checks. Now, when it runs the checks on, say, your 1,000 systems, it will look for any ones that had anomalies, and it will generate a single report and shoot that over to you, right? But you could also theoretically just open a ticket in ServiceNow or your ITSM or whatever it happens to be, right? It keeps it pretty succinct. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you the jobs. I'm going to run those because some people are just looky-loos and they just want to see the parts moving. After that, I'm going to go back and we'll take a look at the playbooks. So this is Ascender, our enterprise automation platform, which really allows you to store, share, and run your automations in a very secure manner. You get to have very granular permissions in here. And you have the ability to audit all this stuff, log it all off to our Ascender Ledger Pro system. But in here, templates, this is where you kind of bring all the constituent pieces together for automation. So in here, I have 3 pieces of automation. You see I have the install, the database update, as well as the check. So you know what to do? I'm going to fire off the install job here. I'm just going to hit this little launch icon, and this is a fresh Rocky 9 box that I use for just testing. And so it's going to go out there and it's going to install the parts. And when it's done, we'll meet right back. All right. Through the magic of editing, you didn't have to watch it or wait for any of that. So it is a little bit of a process on the initial configuration. And let me walk you through just so you can kind of better understand the steps as well as how Tripwire operates. Well, first in here, I created a role, which means you can really easily grab this and start using it in your environment if you so choose, as well as make modifications to it. But the role allows me to kind of abstract pieces of code out and I can just kind of reference them really easily. And on the install part, I'm basically running everything that I've created in there. First thing it does is it installs EPEL because that's where Tripwire lives, and then it's going to install the Tripwire binary. After that, it's going to push out to my host here, the pexpect, because I'm using the expect module in Ansible a whole bunch and my system didn't happen to have that in Python. And then I'm going to create something called a local key. So every individual machine has something called a local key that is unique to it, as well as a site key that's unique to the location, right? So the site key can theoretically be shared amongst many. Now what I did is I created something called a custom credential, and it allows me to securely store information in here based on anything I want, right? It doesn't have to be username and password, all that stuff. So I created a custom credential just for this local key and site key, and it's stored in there. And you'd think, oh, well, I'm issuing the Tripwire commands to generate these, so that's going to be plain text. Well, the good thing about this is I added no log true, so you can't actually see the output, thus you can't see my password. Now, if some enterprising person did come along and write a Tripwire module, they could obfuscate just that and still get all of the output. And you know what? Maybe I will do that. Drop me a comment. Let me know. Drop me a comment, email, something like that if you're interested in that, and maybe I'll put a little bit of time into it. I digress. I'm doing some configuration modification to the Tripwire config file. Now, you have kind of two sort of files that you configure that you consume in Tripwire to like actually tell it what to do. So one is going to be the config file. That's where you're setting up like, hey, send emails or don't, or kind of those settings associated with that stuff. And so I really just kind of put this in here to show you how to tweak and tune that. But then there's also the policy file, and the policy file is what you're actually going to scan, and you know, which files and folders, and then how you're going to kind of associate them with various scorings and stuff like that. So here we are doing the Tripwire config manipulation. After that, we generate the config file, and what it does is it takes that plain text file and it essentially compiles it and encrypts it using the site and or local key. I can never quite remember which one is used for which. And then here it is also doing a change to the policy file. And what I'm doing here is by default, it's looking in, because I'm running this as a specific user, and it's watching that user account and it's looking for temp files that pop in there. And I'm just saying basically ignore the Ansible folder, right? So whenever Ansible's hitting this thing, it's going to be like throwing some temp stuff in there. So just kind of ignore that for now. And then I generate a policy file for that. Now that we've done that, you run something called the Tripwire init, right? So I've got my config like compiled and encrypted, as well as my policy. I do the init, and what it'll do is it'll scan all those things and initially create your database. Well, after that, I run the Tripwire check. And what the Tripwire check does is it takes a look at that database file and compares it to everything it sees on the system. And then I have it go ahead and run the update command. So update the database again based on everything you found. So it's looking for any violations. And I'm saying, hey, any violations you find after the initial install, go ahead and just put those in the database, right? And accept all of that. After that, I do a couple of kung fu things that I actually don't necessarily use in the install, but I do use them later, and it's pulling out how many violations there were, as well as a path to that output file. The output file is actually what I use to do the database update. You can see it right there. Well, after I do the check, I actually run another check. So I've noticed when you do a check and then you update the database, it actually creates kind of a backup of the database file. And then the next time you run a check, that shows a violation of that. So I just go ahead and do that twice just to get all of that cleaned out, and you're good to go. So after that, it's a baseline system that's clean, and I should be able to run a check and it show up okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop back into my template section, Tripwire, and I'm going to run the check through the magic of editing. We'll be back momentarily. All right, the check is actually much simpler than the install, right? There was a lot of steps in there, and the check, what I'm doing is I first run the check, and it's going to essentially running Tripwire -- check. That's all it's really doing. It takes the generated report file, it looks for any violations. So I'm really just kind of digging through there, looking for any violations that I happen to find, looking at the count. I'm also extracting the path, so I have that I can use. If there were any violations, it's going to download that violation file. It's going to kind of compile a big list of all of that, and then it will send an email. But you can see no violations found. So let's create some violations really quick. So one of the things it does by default is watch the root folder. And so I've got this right here. Present working directory is the root folder. So let me test.txt. I'll just edit a file. Hello, internet. Escape. Let me save that. So now I'm just going to rerun the exact same job, and we should see some violations as well as get an alert email. All right, the check has completed successfully. Let me scroll down, and as you can see right here, download trip violations. That means it actually saw some stuff, so it pulled those reports. It generated all of the pathing lists, and then it sent me an email. So let me jump over to my email and take a look. All right, as you can see, it's not the fanciest email. I could probably just throw a quick and simple email template on here to maybe in the body just generate an HTML chart, you know, of all of the violations that we saw, like all the hosts that have violations and maybe they count. All that'd be really easy to put together, and I probably was just being lazy and didn't do it. But as you can see right here, attached is the report file itself. So if I want to pop it open, I could take a look and see all the violations. Interesting thing about these report files is they also are encrypted, right? So it's going to send all this stuff safely so that you can't necessarily see all this plain text. You're going to have to decrypt it to take a look. But hopefully you're not seeing a huge amount of systems with compromise information simultaneously. And even then, we could decrypt this and then attach it to the email and send it on, right? Or we could just put all that information directly in the email body. So many options, right? There's a lot of flexibility there. Now, we did the install, and then after that, we did the check, and we saw it clean, we saw violations, and now that there are violations, we want to go ahead and accept those. So how do I go about that? I run another quick job. So in here, I go to my templates section. I'm going to type Tripwire. I'm going to pop into Tripwire, and I will update and accept all changes. All right, now that I've done that, I have updated all of the database entries, and so now the next time I run the check, it's going to come up clean. So at this point, we're done. We've done all the things. We've done the install on a clean system, we've run checks, and then we've updated the database, which is going to be the thing you're going to do 90% of the time, at least as far as I understand Tripwire. I am by no means an expert, so for those of you that are experts, let me know in the comments. Show me how kind of best practice people use this thing. How would you change, tweak, tune this thing to kind of fit your environment? Because honestly, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but I know there are tons of you out there that are, and I'd love to hear how you would utilize it. Now, if that is as much as you're interested in, please feel free to contact us. If you have any questions or comments, like I said, please reach out. For those of you that are curious, let me pull up the playbooks really quick, and we'll kind of dive in and see if there's anything interesting in there. All right, so taking a look here in my VS Code, you can see I have just a handful of playbooks. One is the one that's pulled up right here. This is the one I actually developed on. So before I actually create a role, I just make a playbook that works. Then I take that, extract it out, and put those little pieces into a role. And my role is right here in the roles folder, Tripwire tasks, and it's in my public Git repository. So you can go and grab any of this, all of this. It's available to you. And you can see in the roles, I kind of broke it out into task files. And so in these task files, say example, create local key, it is using expect, and it is just tasks, right? There's no play section. There's none of that stuff. It's really just the specific thing you're trying to do. Like, what are the individual tasks? So I just kind of cut them and paste them from my original playbook. And in here, you can see with expect, I'm firing off a command. So say for the example, it's this twadmin generate keys, and I'm saying -L for local, -S would be site, and it is interactive prompting. That's kind of the interesting bit about the command line version of Tripwire here, is that whenever you're throwing commands at it, it's going to say, hey, what's your passkey for this or passkey for that? And so when you're generating this stuff, it wants you to like put in your key once and then double check it. Well, essentially what I'm doing is I've got credentials. Remember that custom credential that I created in Ascender? I'm pushing that in as an extra var at runtime, right? So it's going to override any variables that already exist, but it's coming in as local key password, and then I'm just using that here in the responses section. So expect says fire this command. Responses is if you see this pop up on the command prompt, here's the answer for it. And so here are the two questions and the two answers. I also added the no log true right there so that it will obfuscate the output. So anytime you have sensitive information in a task, you don't want it to just like display to screen, right? Like if you click on it, you don't get that that password exposed, or that key, or that certificate, or whatever it happens to be, right? That token. You can kind of hide all that information behind no log underscore true. Now, or no underscore log colon true. The problem with that is it also pulls away any possibly useful detailed information in there. So if you are having problems with something like this, you can always comment that out and just put in some test or dummy data on your system, and you can see what's going on. But for kind of this, I want it to be a little bit closer to production ready, so you can see that that's in there. But this role, it's really just a bunch of task file. The main file is really just calling all those individual ones, and if you wanted to do the install, it's essentially ready for the install method. But to take a look at install, if you recall, we're really just right here. You can see right at the top, I have in the vars section, I have the site and local key. Please don't put those directly in your playbook. I really just put this in here for informational purposes. It's so that you can easily look and say, oh yeah, these are the variables I need to inject at runtime. So if you're doing it on command line, pop them in as extra vars, maybe put them in a vault, like a vaulted file or something like that. If you're using a Cinder or an AWX derivative, pump them in from a custom credential, right? Don't just store them plain text in here. I try not to do that stuff, but for me, I like to put all of my variables at the top just as kind of documentation, even if I'm going to override them. So our tasks, we're installing Tripwire, right? The DNF for adding EPEL as well as Tripwire itself. I'm adding pexpect on the remote system, and then I start firing off the expect commands. So nothing too crazy there. I'm using line in file, which is really great. It will look and make sure that a file exists in a specific format here. In this one, for the policy file, I'm actually adding something in, and I'm saying insert before so that it actually puts it in the right root section. So I'm saying, hey, ignore the Ansible temp directory, right? And just make sure that exists. It's a pretty handy feature to be able to just kind of pop things in directly below a specific line, directly above a specific line. So these are kind of static files. And and I also thought if I had this as in a production environment, what I would want is kind of a baseline policy, and then I would want to tack on extra things. So say it's an Nginx server, I would probably want to attach on, after I build that, attach on some extra little policy piece, like from a template, and then another one. I was thinking in my head, the best way to accomplish that is to actually build that file on the local host, right? Do it on the in the execution environment itself. Build that policy file, and then once it's complete, use a template module to push that out to the remote system. That way it's idempotent. Because if you push out via template and then you push all these extra little templates, it's always going to show a change condition. And I don't like to see a change unless I absolutely need one, right? Like unless there really is a change, I don't want to see that. So I digress. I'm going down the rabbit hole here. Use the expect to generate the config, the policy. We're doing the Tripwire init. Remember that initializes the database the first time. The Tripwire check, that's actually doing the check. So it's operating against the system and saying, hey, does everything match in the base? Like, has anything actually changed on my important files, right? Like checking the integrity there. And then after that, we're grabbing the path of the file that was created, the report file, and then we're running the update. And again, the update accept all, it basically looks for any violations that happen to be in that policy, and it will go from there. So this is the last Tripwire check I ran that actually had the violation in there, remember, because it sent the email and all that good stuff. And I'm just going to run into the Tripwire check command itself and look at output, and it should show me this big giant report with a lot of information. But if you look down right here, total violations found, there were 2. And if you scroll down just a little bit more, it'll show you kind of a summary on what it was. So added in root test.txt, as well as it saw a modification in the root folder. So essentially that's what it's doing. I mean, there's a whole lot of extra information here, because when the template file I built it from, it had a bunch of stuff that it was supposed to look for, and those files never actually existed. So that's just me being lazy and not cleaning up that policy, right? Because this isn't actually a production box. This is just in my test environment. But essentially, this is what you would expect to see whenever you see violations. That's essentially what I'm looking for when I'm running the check. Hey, check this total violations. If it's not 0, we know there was something in there, and let's react to that. So again, if you have any questions or comments, I am keen to hear from experts that utilize this, because I am unfamiliar with it, but it seems like a really fascinating piece of technology. I was actually introduced to it by one of my colleagues, Jimmy, who actively develops on our Cinder Ledger Pro system, which pulls the logs from a Cinder and parses them and allows you to do some very interesting things, like watch when a package is added, removed, a service is added or removed or changed in any way. And so we can watch those things. And so some people I had asked, hey, can you file level watch when things change? Well, Tripwire, that's what it's purpose built for. It's specifically designed for that. And so I found it to be quite interesting, and I wanted to see how it worked. If you have any other demos that you would like to see, if you'd like to holler at us, not just drop a comment, but you'd actually like to holler at us, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk to you, help you along your automation journey or anything else you've got going. So if nothing else, happy automating, happy tripwiring, and we'll see you next time. Bye.